Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Assure Model Lesson Plan, where I will be going over the Captain Copyright lesson that I created to help students not become a plagiarizing pirate. The first step in the Assure model is to analyze learners, and in this specific lesson, learners range from third and fourth grade levels. These students were required to create a research assignment with their teacher, and my job was to help them learn how to use copyright correctly. The learners ranged from a variety of ethnic backgrounds. It did include learners who were English language learners. They also included learners who had accommodations such as repeat and clarify instructions. While analyzing learners, it was important for me to understand the age group in which I was creating the lesson for, as well as the students that I was presenting to. The next step in the Assure Model lesson plan are the state standards. And in this specific lesson, learners will be able to ethically use and clearly communicate information in various formats. This came from the standards and guidelines for the state of Texas, Strand 1, Dimension 1. The second thing that students will or learners will be able to do would be to practice the ethical and legal use of information, including transformative fair use and intellectual freedom. This comes from Strand 1, Dimension 2 of the Standards and Guidelines for Texas. And the third thing that learners will be able to do would be to use digital intellectual property responsibly and understand the current copyright rules. This comes from Strand 4, Dimension 6 of the Standards and Guidelines for Texas. The next step would be to select strategies and resources for this assignment. Since this specific assignment was teacher directed, as far as teaching students directly about copyright rules through the use of a slideshow or presentation, I needed to make sure that I had all the resources available for me. Since it was a digital slideshow and it was teacher produced, I needed to determine which program to create the slideshow and presentation on. I did create mine using Google Slides and was able to use that to upload into my YouTube presentation. When compiling resources that be used to copyright rules, I had to make sure which specific objectives would need to be addressed before I decided which specific copyright rules I wanted to teach, which went back to the other slide about state standards. I had to determine which resources would be used to gather information for the presentation, such as understanding which resources for the Fair Use Acts I wanted to get and for the Creative Commons and as well as public domain. I also wanted to determine the theme of the lesson, and I chose Captain Copyright. I chose Captain Copyright because why not use the idea of pirating or being a pirate as an example of taking intellectual property without permission? Once I determined the theme, I wanted to make sure how I could implement it. Again, I needed to find clip art or images that were free to use, and I was able to use Free Pick for those specific materials. How did I utilize resources in this lesson? First off, I needed to preview the resources. I needed to make sure I had a clear understanding of the copyright rules and determine which specific copyright rules I would teach to students and how to teach it on their level since they are third and fourth graders. We know that the copyright rules can be complicated, and we know that there are different ways to restate what the standards are or the rules are. So it was important for me to make sure that the words were user friendly for third and fourth graders. Preparing the resources. Basically, I need to make sure that my slideshow presentation was ready for instruction. I needed to prepare the environment. In this case, since it's direct teaching instruction, I would have students be sitting in groups of four, and they need to be able to see the presentation on the screen. They will not be utilizing their own tools during this specific lesson. However, they will be able to use their own technology to find their own resources for the presentation once they make it back into the classroom. How do I prepare the learner? And that would be to make sure that I introduce the learning standards and objectives at the beginning of the lesson. The next step in the Assure model is to require learner participation. This is quite a challenge considering that this specific lesson was teacher directed or teacher centered because it was a direct presentation. However, after this lesson, the students will be able to showcase their skills on what they learned for the copyright rules within their own research projects. But after the teacher-centered presentation, the learner will. They need to make sure that they can apply their understanding of copyright rules through showcasing their knowledge in their own research project. They will demonstrate their understanding by matching the specific copyright rule to the digital media used in their project. Once they found the digital media within their project, they would determine, was this specific media part of the Fair Use Act? Did they use the Creative Commons, or was it something that was in the public domain? They will also create a reference page where all digital media is cited correctly. That is how learners would be required for participation during the lesson. Most of it will be occurring after the direct instruction from me. And last but not least, in the Assure model, lesson planning is the E for evaluate and revise. So we all know that it's important to evaluate students, but it's also important to evaluate the instructor. Since this was something that students would learn from direct instruction, we do need to make sure that they're able to demonstrate the understanding of copyright rules. So I would help the teacher with their understanding, making sure that students were able to showcase what they learned within their own specific project. Since this was not a formal assessment or something that was a summative or a test, it would be something that they would actually have to showcase or demonstrate in their own presentations. How would I want my students to evaluate my instruction? First off, I would want to know, was the presentation effective in teaching the copyright rules? Did Captain Copyright do his job, and did his crew help them not be able to walk the plank when it comes to copywriting? I would allow my students to give feedback through a form that indicates whether or not they were able to understand me, whether or not they were able to keep their attention on the lesson, whether or not they were able to ask questions or participate, and then what the actual presentation skills were for the instructor. It is important for me when I was selecting my strategies and resources and preparing the room. In this specific lesson, I would most likely have a pirate ship atmosphere where the library does become a transformation into a pirate ship to engage the learners all together. The references in which I used to create this specific presentation came from the School Librarian Standards from the Texas Education Agency, where I was able to look over the standards that were used specifically for this lesson. I also used the textbook, Instructional Technology and Media for Learning, written by Smaldino and et al., and we're able to use this specific book to help me with the Assure model. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.